the things that they were saying to show empathy for their
Yeah.
patients.
I suppose when you work in the STI clinic and you do it all day, every day, you get a little callous.
Oh, I mean,
I've seen that with like miscarriages and that kind of stuff too, where providers are just horrible at giving that information.
He said that was really fun.
Only 13 today. Where are the other 10?
You counted us that fast?
Yeah, where are the other 10?
Diana's counting.
Wendy's
Okay.
grandmother's having surgery today, so she
Right.
had to be.
Someone's sitting
Yeah,
here.
that's fair.
I
Katia.
don't know where they are.
Katia.
So extra credit?
That's
No.
Katia.
But we come to class.
The extra credit is you get to see my smiling face directly.
Is that what?
That's what it is.
our
The slides
Yeah.
under.
So today, I think I want to talk about the developing child. And so I was mentioning a little bit before we got started. This is very, very important as a ground, as the bedrock for the rest of your pediatric experience. Oh, where are you going? Hopping back to your seat, yeah. So this is very important that it serves as the bedrock for the rest of your experience in pediatrics. If you spend any time working with children, you need to understand everything I'm going to talk about and everything that's in chapter 20. And I want you to really read chapter 20. There's a whole lot of detail there. Okay? Understand, I don't expect any test questions that says, the sensory motor stage of Piaget is for ages what to what. None of that nonsense. You'll see things like this 4-year-old is acting this way. You know, what is he representing? Or if you see this and the parents are concerned, what does that mean? What do you say to the parents? That kind of thing, okay? Now, so we're talking about growth and development, and there are two very different terms, growth and development. Anyone know the difference between growth and development?
Growth is physical, development is physiological.
Well, there you go. Growth is physical. Development is often mental or neurological development as they achieve different milestones. Okay, and it comes from within. But growth is size and weight and structure and that kind of thing. So understand that I'm going to throw a lot of theories at you today. A lot of theories, and all of them are correct, and none of them are correct at the same time. They're all very individual based on what you're looking at. So once in a while they may seem to interact with each other, and other times they may seem to disagree with each other, and the answer is yes. Okay? And that's because growth and development is a very individual process based on an awful lot of competing factors, and the two biggest ones, of course, are nature and nurture. Nature being that all humans are inherently close to the same at the beginning, and that we're born with a certain set of traits. That's nature. That's what you were born with. That's the personality that you were born with. It's also your genetic background. The risk factors caused by your parents and what they bring to you. That's nature, okay? And then there's nurture. And nurture refers to the environment that the child grows up in. It's what makes them who they are, so to speak, as they age. Right now in my FYS class, I'm reading The Invisible Thread, and it's by that author that came here and spoke a couple of years ago, the one who she befriended a little poor boy on the streets in New York City and became like his mentor and kind of changed his life. In that book, it talks a lot about this boy's life, and what it really showcases is the cycle of poverty. This child, from the very beginning, grew up in a very poor environment with a lot of violence and drugs and crime around him all the time, and nobody to take care of him as a human being. Nobody cared about him. He lived in a different home every couple of days, and all of his uncles were drug dealers, and his mom was a drug addict who became a powerful drug dealer, and then got destroyed. And this kid, never learned how to use a knife and fork, didn't understand that eggs were for breakfast, had no concept that there were certain foods you could eat at different times, didn't know what orange juice was, this kind of stuff. And that environment, that nurture that he received really helped set him up for failure, right? It was part of the cycle of poverty. Not learning the basic social skills that our culture demands in order to get by. really kind of sets them up. And so it's a great example of nurture and how the environment that you raise a child in has a lot to do with whether or not they're going to be successful or unsuccessful. So nurture in general is parenting skills and the environment in which you put a child into as they grow. A lot of this you're going to recognize from raising your own children, or you're going to recognize from seeing your older or younger siblings and how they act. Just open it. There you go. She's all trying to be quiet. Just get it over with. So a lot of this you're going to see, you're going to recognize. Those of you who have children, I want you to apply what you've seen in your children and say, oh yeah, he did do that. Well, that makes sense. Or, well, I didn't see that in my children, that kind of thing. I want you to do that. Those of you who don't have children, think about your siblings. And don't think about your siblings as the pain in the butt that they have been because they're younger than you, but think about your siblings as, oh yeah, I saw them go through that. I remember this. Or yourselves, yeah, I remember doing that too. That's why I was so interested in Harry Potter when I was 13. Oh, I get it.
21.
Yeah. No, I hear you. My wife still hasn't gotten out of that stuff either. You know, she was making plans for the what is it? Catching Fire part?
Okay.
Mockingjay
Okay,
Part 4
The
is
Hunger
coming
Games
out.
is not Harry Potter, so get off that right now because Harry Potter's like 50 million times better.
It's the same magical world, so to speak. Although it's much more of a post-apocalyptic magical world.
Yeah.
But
I want to
And
be
then-
Harry Potter. I don't want to be in the Hunger
and then of
Games.
course the Star Wars thing. So you know, one of our friends in Scouts, her church is renting out a theater the night after Star Wars comes out
Is that your church?
for us. It's not my church, it's in Scouts, but so I'll be watching the midnight showing of Star Wars the day after it comes out. Which,
That's cool though.
yeah, right? It's kind of cool.
Especially at midnight.
Yeah, the midnight showing. I don't know what we're doing all day. I guess watching movies. But I'm not cool enough to get tickets to do it on the same day. Although I don't know if I call that cool. But so
I think it's really cool, I mean.
I understand that you think it's cool. No. So let's talk about growth a little bit. One thing that's really fascinating about growth is the body doesn't grow in a continuous linear phase. What happens is the body builds up resources and things kind of stop. And it builds and builds and builds, and then all of a sudden it explodes in this explosion of growth. And they're what we call growth spurts. And the reason there are growth spurts is because the body can't maintain that degree of activity all the time. It has to shift resources from area to area. And so there's periods of mental growth, and then periods of physical growth, and then back to mental growth again, and then periods of physical growth over and over and over again in development. Which is why kids develop so much between the age of 6 and 12 mentally. They learn so much stuff really fast. And then all of a sudden they hit 7th grade and they grow 6 inches. Okay? Because so the body doesn't do it all at one time. It has to build up its resources and prepare, and then it explodes. Okay? But it moves along a continuum that's generally predictable in each society. And each society is a little different. It's interesting. You guys are familiar with those growth charts that we use with children, with babies? Okay. Have you ever noticed that the U.S. growth chart is different from the World Health Organization growth chart? And it was an interesting discovery. Americans, like Samoans, don't grow the same as Ethiopians or Nigerians or Filipinos or others. That every nation, based on its underlying wealth and nourishment availability, grow differently. And with the U.S. with the U.S. growth charts, they were trying to compare them to other children and found that an awful lot of them were falling less than 10th percentile. And true today, if you applied today's growth charts to the infantrymen of World War II, they would all be below the 10th percentile too. You know, the average American infantryman in World War II who landed in D-Day was 5'2" and weighed 110 pounds. Very, very small people because of the nourishment that they had growing up in the Great Depression. Okay, and so growth changes based on your socioeconomic status. And what they had to do for the World Health Organization is they developed growth charts for several countries and then put them all together and formed one mean growth chart, so to speak, for a more global image. The interesting piece to that is we don't know which is right. We know what the average is, but maybe average isn't optimal. Maybe average isn't big enough, or maybe average is too small. We don't know what's right. Are Americans too big, or not big enough, or are we the right size? We don't know. Are Samoans the right size? We clearly, we don't have the foggiest idea what is right. All we know is what's normal. All we know is what's common. And so we say, well, assuming everything is the same, that's about the right amount, whatever. It's not nearly it's very scientific, but not nearly as precise as we would hope it to be. Development is the ongoing process that goes throughout the lifespan, and like we mentioned, development is generally more neurologic, more cognitive than it is physical. Okay, and it tends to progress cephalocaudally. Now, what is cephalocaudal development?
Head to tail.
From head to tail. There you go. Cephalocaudal, right? From head to tail, and proximal distal, from inside to outside. Okay. From the midline toward the outside. And if you remember your embryology, you'll remember that it was the same development. They grew longitudinally, then they grew side to side. So and so the same thing happens in children. They grow the same way. They start at the head, and then they move down to the tail, then they move out. And that's where you get and that's why children are the way they are when they're born. If you notice, a newborn is very curled up and central, okay? And the focus is on the brain and how the brain is going to work and what the brain can do. And then eventually it moves toward the outside. And remember we talked about in fetal development, they start with these rapid kicks like that, and then they start to develop more like so, right? And then we move into our pediatric form, after birth, and this starts to turn into this, and then starts to turn into this, and then it starts to turn into playing the piano, right? As they develop away from their core and out into their fingertips and their toes. And the fingers and toes are the last thing to really achieve, perfection, so to speak. And then the last thing that I just have to throw in there, it's a little bit different from the cephalocaudal development, is that the brain is the final organ to develop. And when does the brain finally develop? You guys know when the brain hits it?
25.
25, exactly. 25. So all those 19, 20-year-old folks doing stupid things for no good reason, they have a reason. It's that they're not 25 yet. Impulse control finally is achieved by most people by the time they hit 25.
That's why your insurance goes down.
That's why your insurance goes down. That's why everything is better after your bachelor's program, right? And that's why, I understand why undergraduates would wait until the last minute and then cram to write a paper until noon the next day. I get it. It's part of that impulse control thing. It's part of that difficulty seeing downstream. No excuse for you and you, whatever. But that's part of being a student. I know even me in my 40s, working on my doctoral program, I pulled an all-nighter before my final for application of statistics. And I'll tell you, as you have discovered, it doesn't work. It's much better to get it done beforehand instead of trying to do it all night long, right?
It's the rush, the adrenaline.
Whatever.
Is that what it is?
Well, I don't know what you're talking about. It's definitely not Russian.
My son loves to wait till the last minute and write a paper, and he considers it a challenge. Can I wait till the last minute and knock out this 10-page paper in 5 hours?
No.
Let's see how good I do. And he does pretty well, because it's just an undergrad paper. Not terribly demanding. And he's an engineer, so they don't write papers, they build machines, right? So now, your book doesn't do real good justice on the touchpoint concept, but I really like the touchpoint concept, mostly because I really like the theorist who did the touchpoint concept. Who came up with touchpoints? Anybody know? Who? You got it? Brazelton. T. Barry Brazelton. T. Barry Brazelton is one of my favorite pediatricians. He's one of my favorite pediatric current or contemporary pediatric theorists. And it's all about love and understanding and caring. He is the exact opposite of Dr. Spock, which was all about demanding and setting schedules and isolation and you know, learning how to do it on his own, you know, that kind of thing. Dr. Brazelton would be more of the co-bedding, attachment parenting kind of pediatrician. And I've always, you know, he's always really spoken, he says the words that I want to say. So I really like Brazelton. But he came up with a series of touch points, and if you look in your book, box 20-1, it talks about the touch points. And what they are is just little high spots to teach parents when you see these, you should probably, you know, recognize that they're going to come. You know, and it helps parents understand what's happening. You know, for example, at 3 weeks, the infant starts to learn how to calm himself, and parents debate the use of a pacifier versus the thumb. So when you know that, what does that tell you when you're taking care of a parent in the mother-baby floor who just had a newborn? What does that tell you? What do you tell them?
They don't know how to calm themselves.
That they don't know how to calm themselves, but it'll get better in a couple of weeks. They're going to start to figure this out in 3 weeks. So the first 2 to 3 weeks is really intense parenting time. But after 3 weeks or so, they start to figure out how to calm themselves, and then they'll relax. So you can give them a little anticipatory guidance. Yes, your 2-week-old is not capable of being put down. Okay? I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. He's not capable of it, he can't tolerate it, and he will never tolerate it until he's about 3 to 4 weeks old, and not really until he's about 4 months old. Okay? And then 6 to 8 weeks old, each infant interacts differently to each parent through facial expression. Have you guys ever heard of the experiments with facial expressions in newborns? They are fascinating stuff. Newborns are really impressive it's really impressive how early they can figure things out. There's a series of experiments where they hook babies up to monitors so they can monitor his respirations and his pulse and put a video camera on the baby, and then they had one of the parents walk in the room. And when dad walks in the room, the heart rate goes up, the respirations go up, the hands flare out, and the eyes get really big. Here he comes! Just like when your dog, when you come home. And they're like, he's here, right? Because dad's job is to play. And babies know very early in life that dad's going to come and pick them up and throw them in the air and tickle them and goof off with them. Because dad's play. So when dad walks in the room, babies get excited. On the other hand, when the mother would walk in the room, the hands come together and the baby centers, prepares to be picked up, his heart rate slows down, and he goes, ooh, here she comes. Okay, mommy's gonna love me. Because that's mommy's job, and babies have picked that up very early, that mommy's job is to love. Okay, and that's why when dad comes home, you always say, Daddy's home! And they all tackle dad, and they wrap around his legs, and he picks them up, and he tickles them, and he throws them in the air, and it goes their entire life until they're too big and busy to pick up, or too big to pick up, right? And my wife gets jealous when I come home and the kids do that. Daddy's home! And when my wife comes home, it's, hi Mom, I'm hungry. You know? Or, Mom, I need help with my homework, right? And my wife says, well, why do they do that? Why don't you run to the door and give me a hug? And I said, well, do you ever pick them up and tickle them and throw them in the air? No. So when you come home, it's not playtime, right? They just look at you like, because it's not your job, it's not your job, right? You haven't always done it. They know it's fake. They know the deal. We all have our roles in life, and that's just how it works, you know. I told you guys a story about taking the garbage out, that in my house, my wife just can't seem to get the garbage past the back door. It just doesn't work. It's like it comes in as this invisible barrier. She can't get past the back door. Because it's my job to take the garbage out. So I'll take the garbage out, and I appreciate that she gets it to the back door. And likewise, you know, I throw my underwear on the floor, and I kind of do it on purpose because she can't get the garbage outside. We each have our jobs.
Do you at least make it close to the basket?
I do. I throw it. I'm like, yeah, I'm not a lady. I'm not a basketball player, right? So Brazelton, back to work again. So Brazelton has tracked a series of generalizable periods in life where you can teach parents, if you see this, that's because this is, you know, every baby's going to have this happen. And it gives a little anticipatory guidance, helps people over those humps that the kids are going to have to move, that the kids are going to move through that parents usually struggle with. Okay? Now there are a series of growth and development theories, and like I said, each one is both right and wrong at the same time, depending on the perspective that you're going to look at. And we're going to break them down by what type of theory they are, and that'll help you kind of understand it. Because they're all overlapping, and they come at it from a different perspective. It's a little bit like pickup sticks. You know, they're all going in all kinds of general directions, but they're all true at this, from a perspective. Okay? So, and it's also important, they're not gospel, okay? No child follows every single theory perfectly. Each child is going to take them at their own speed. And you'll see that these are broad strokes from 3 to 6 or less than 11 years old, and broad stroke type of things. They're not saying when a child hits his 4th birthday, he will be doing this. Okay, even the physical development stuff of like picking up their head and rolling over is put in a perspective of months instead of weeks. It's not by the 4th month your child will do this. It's somewhere between 4 and 8 months your child will do this. Okay, so these are very broad stroke things. So don't take anything too seriously. Just use it as a general framework of how to think. So we start with the psychoanalytical theories. That try to figure out psychological development. If any of you guys are interested, I have a great book on, it's an audible book with this great pediatric development specialist, a pediatric psychologist giving a great lecture on pediatric development. Talks an awful lot about it. So there'll be parts in here that I've taken from his work and added to this lecture just to give you guys a little bit more depth. But you're welcome to listen to it if you want. Now that I've finished my Stephen King, I can listen to Watson for a while. So, Freud is the grandfather of psychoanalytical theory. He's the one who came up with it in the first part. And in America, he's got a bad reputation as being kind of a pervert. Okay? And that's because he wasn't born in America. Okay? He's German. And the translation from German to American changed a lot of his concepts. And so I've used the original words where I could. Because I think that the original German makes more sense than trying to translate it into American. Like for example, when he talks about sexual response, he doesn't talk about physical coupling. He doesn't talk about a 5-year-old actually dreaming about having sex with his mother. What sex is really, what he means when he's talking about sex is personal gratification, happiness, and what brings me joy. That's what Freud meant when he talked about sex. Okay? So he's not some big old pervert. He's just, it doesn't translate well. So he's got the 3 primary motivators that are going on inside your head. And I always think of these 3 as those cartoons with the little angel and the little devil on the shoulder, right? Once do it, yeah. And he's like, well, probably shouldn't think about that. That's not very nice. And then ultimately the head has to make the decision, right? And so the one is the id. Okay, and the id is instinct. Now, in German, that word is the S, not the id, okay? And the S is, okay? It's what is going on. It's who you are, okay? It's your central core, the is of you, all right? It's your kind of your essence, and it's a very primal, instant gratification. I want that right now, okay, kind of thing, all right? And that's the little devil because there's no control on that little one. He just, whatever makes me happy at that moment, that's what I want. That's the is, okay, or the id. And then there's the ego. And you'll see I wrote ich. What is ich in German?
It's
I, okay? That's the personal identity. That's the you. That's the one that you, the identity that you show to the world kind of thing, okay? And so it's when we talk about ego, in America, when we say, that guy's got a lot of ego on him, it means they're pretentious and that they're full of themselves and that kind of stuff. But that's not what Freud really meant. Ego is the ability to cope, your ability to interact with the outside world. And so, if you've got a lot of ego, you have a lot of you're adaptable and you're able to interact with the world in a positive way. That you're self-reliant, so to speak, not really egotistical. Okay? And then there's the super ego, the uber-ich. And the uber-ich, the superego, regulates behavior. That's where you've got the little angel and the little devil, and the superego gets to make the final decision. And it's often rather very moral in its basics. It's I like to think of the superego as the mask that we hide behind. Okay, everybody wears a mask all the time. Everybody has this persona that they show to the world that is not really themselves. Okay, and sometimes those are really useful, and sometimes those are just plain old acting. But you've got a mask that you show to the world. Believe it or not, I don't spend a lot of time dressed like this on Saturday and Sunday when I'm out mowing my lawn, right? Because this is my mask that I'm showing you. This is my superego. This is my my image that I want to project to the world. Okay, and so that's the super-ich, the uber-ich, the superego. Is that what regulates your behavior and what you show to the world. Now, Freud has kind of fallen out of favor. He's pretty old-fashioned. People are like, yeah, too much talk about sex in Freud. And he's got several stages, the oral phase, the anal phase, that kind of thing. And the interesting thing about it is it's kind of common sense true, but a lot of people struggle with it. You know, yes, infants are orally motivated. We get it. It's a survival mechanism. Everything goes in their mouth, and they have to put things in their mouth because that's where they survive, and that's where they experience the world. And so when Freud looked at babies, he saw babies sucking, and he was like, aha, babies are orally motivated. I got it. They get comfort through sucking. And so he would say that they get, here's what I'm looking for, the sexual gratification by sucking. Okay, it doesn't mean that an infant wants to do oral sex. It means that he gets pleasure by sucking, and that's where pacifiers and breastfeeding and thumbs, and that's why all that's so very important. Okay, and then there's the anal phase, which is toddlerhood, and he's not talking about wanting to engage in anal sex. He's talking about the joy that toddlers get when they potty train, the ability to control their bodily functions as they start to move through, and they get a lot of good positive reinforcement by controlling their bladder and bowel. And so there's a lot of joy that comes along with that. There's a really funny YouTube video you guys may have seen where there's a dog taking a dump on the grass, and this little toddler, she comes over and she's patting him on the butt. Oh, good dog, you're pooping, you know. And she's rewarding the dog for potty training, right? Which is exactly what everybody in her life is doing for her. Every time she poops in the toilet, everything's happy and people sing songs and give her candy, right? So she's just doing the exact same thing on the dog. She doesn't understand that the dog's already potty trained, a little older than she is. She just wants to reward him for that. And she would do the same thing for her mom and dad, too, if she saw her mom and dad taking a dump, right? And then it goes into, it moves beyond that. You don't need to know much about it. Then there's Erikson. Now, Erikson, he's the man. I love Erikson. He is my favorite theorist. I love Erikson. He describes life really well. Now you're going to see a lot of it. You're going to see all of them. Okay? But Erikson describes life really well and very simply. And what I really like about him is, unlike Piaget, who uses these fancy words, Erikson is very cut and dry. You know his stages. You know exactly what's going on. So when he talks about trust versus mistrust, it's intuitive. Okay? What do you think trust versus mistrust means? Learning how to trust. And if you can't learn how to trust, you mistrust, right? So what does that mean to a newborn when they're talking about trust versus mistrust? What can you think of as like an example of trust versus mistrust?
Which is like the example you gave in the beginning, where the father comes in, they trust that they know that father's there to play with them. Like they trust, they're excited. Yes,
Okay.
we're going to play.
Okay.
And it's the same thing with the mother too. When they
Okay,
see
so
the
what about the mistrust? What would be an example of mistrust?
I know some newborns, like when they go to grandma, they cry because they don't recognize
Mhm.
that person, and then you give them back to mom, and they're okay, and then mom has to kind of be like, oh, it's okay, baby, this is grandma.
So that's kind of Bowlby and attachment theory, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. That's part of stranger anxiety. So my favorite example of trust versus mistrust is I tell everybody that your baby doesn't cry because he's evil. Okay, he cries because whatever he needs is not being met right now. Okay, and so, but babies don't like to cry any more than we like to cry, and that's why they start with that fussy, alert phase. They start going, they pull up close to the inside, and they suck a little, and they go, which is kind of going, hello, anybody out there? Hello? Okay, and then when they can't get their needs met, they cry, okay? And they just go, that's it, I'm gonna cry because obviously I'm not being loud enough, all right? And if you can teach a child that every time they go like that, you're gonna pick them up immediately, guess what? They don't progress beyond that stage. They don't cry very often, all right? But if you teach a child that the only way they're gonna get any attention is by crying, they're gonna cry an awful lot. They skip right over the early phases and go right to crying, okay? And that's a child who has developed a mistrust in his parents. He has to cry in order to get attention. He can't get attention any other way. So he can't trust that if I go like this, my mommy and daddy will be there to pick me up. Now, what happens with that is as it moves through life, the child who learned trust early in life is adventurous, outgoing. He always knows mom's going to be there no matter what happens. And you get a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old who likes to jump off the roof. Or you get like my son Nick, my son William, who spent more time above ground than on the ground. He loved to be in trees and that kind of thing. And he once got me in big trouble by climbing up on the top of the 15-passenger van while I wasn't paying attention. And my wife caught him on the van. And so I got in big trouble because I thought, yeah, he's here somewhere. Oh, okay, well, come on out and help me get the groceries. And there he is on top of the van. Hi, Dad! He's obviously not in his room. And so, but that's a kid who has complete trust. No matter what happens, mom and dad are going to be there to pick him up. Now, the opposite of that, the mistrust, is the kid who doesn't learn that mom and dad are always there to pick him up. And those are the kids that go into social situations like this. Okay? And they hide behind your legs and they can't get up. They have a hard time with being shy. It's hard for them to be, outgoing and adventurous because they're not quite sure how the world's going to take them, I've always been kind of an attachment parent kind of guy. I love having my kids around me and on me all the time, and I see it in their upbringing. They're all, amazing public speakers. They all love to be the center of attention. They all love to tell jokes or be an actor or that kind of stuff. None of my children, you would never consider any of them shy. Okay? They are not shy at all. And I like to say it's because I embraced Erikson very early and said trust versus mistrust is incredibly important for the rest of their life. Okay, so the trust versus trust is where the child learns how to trust, and he learns that if I trust, everything is going to be okay. Versus I don't trust, and therefore I'm going to be shy and kind of inward the rest of my life. That's not to say that none of my children are introverts, but then none of them are shy either. Okay. And then there's autonomy versus shame and doubt, usually somewhere between the 1st and 3rd year, and it's where they're trying to balance their independence and their self-sufficiency, okay? So they have to learn how to be autonomous, and if they can't be autonomous, then, or when they get reproached for being independent and autonomous, then they start to feel like a little self-doubt, a little bit of I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, okay? And so so this is the age where children are wanting to do everything themselves, and they're trying to figure out the world. They want to pick their own clothes out. They want to button their own clothes, and they do a horrible job at it. And you see these 2- and 3-year-olds out there like, what the heck are you? Oh, you dressed yourself, of course. Okay? And so your parents get frustrated by this because the child wants to assert some kind of independence, and you have to let him be independent. You have to let him be a 2-year-old. Everybody gets to be who they are, right? And the difficulty is trying to find, discipline, okay? Discipline, by the way, is not the same thing as control. And unfortunately, too many parents confuse discipline and control. Okay? Control is, no, you're going to wear what I said to wear. No, you're going to eat what I said you have to eat. That's control. That's not discipline. And so toddlers going through this autonomy versus shame and doubt struggle with control. They want control over their own world, and they have to learn their boundaries, so to speak, what's safe and what's not safe. And I always say anybody who calls it the terrible twos has never raised a 3-year-old. Okay. Once you've met a 3-year-old, you recognize 2s are nothing. Okay. 2s are easy because they're small and manageable and relatively quiet and easy to bully. No, okay. 3-year-olds are like, come at me, I got this, right? 3-year-olds don't put up with anything. So it's the terrible 2s versus the god awful 3s. Oh. Okay. And then they move into initiative versus guilt. And this is where they start to become resourceful. They really start to learn new things. It starts to be the age of me and I want to do it. I want to do it. I want to push the buttons on the elevator. I want to lock the door. I want to hit the button on the car thing. You guys recognize this in your preschool children?
I mean, my little sister,
Yeah.
we would make her so I have an older sister, and my little sister's 7 years younger than me, so there's quite an age gap between me and my little sister, my older sister, and so like, she was like 4 or 5, whatever, she wanted to press the button for the elevator.
Yeah.
And me and Jordan would make Helen so like, I'm gonna press it first, and we'd press it, and she'd start crying.
Yeah.
You know, just like laughing at her and
Yeah.
everything, but she'd get so mad, it would be so funny to us.
Yeah, exactly. And all three of those stages, by the way, are perfect. Developmental stages. You're supposed to be mean to your preschool sister. You have to be, because you're like 12 and she's 6, and so you got to make fun of her and be mean to her because you're 12, okay? And you get to be 12 the same way she gets to be 3, okay? So the 3 to 6, the initiative versus guilt, is when they start to explore their world and take initiative and change things and interact with their world and be really in control of their world, and they want to do everything. And again, just like the toddlers, it gets very frustrating for parents, because I got to get to church, man, and you're taking forever trying to tie your shoes, you know. And so it gets very frustrating, and so parents have to learn to strike a balance between, okay, I know you want to do it, but I don't have time. I'm going to do it for you, and I'm just going to put up with the fact that you're crying, you know. And they'll get better. Just like you didn't hurt your little sister by pushing the buttons and making her cry. You frustrated her because she was in the initiative phase, right? But if you stifle it too much, you can really make people very self-conscious and very, you know, they're like the victim of bullying, so to speak. So it's important that each one meets these crises. By the way, Erikson called all these things crisis. Each one was a crisis. It was the crisis of initiative and the crisis of industry. And if you couldn't meet your crisis, then you would struggle. And the basic idea is that if you didn't meet your crisis, you would be stuck in that whatever that negative stage was. And unlike Freud, who said once you got stuck, you couldn't fix it, Erikson said, yeah, you can fix it. We just need to work on it a little bit. Okay. And then there's industry versus inferiority, where they develop a sense of confidence through the mastery of tasks. That the better they start to learn how to read, and they start to learn how to do math, and they start to figure things out on their own, and they become very industrious and hardworking, and I want to learn and I want to figure things out. Versus inferiority, girls are stupid at math. Girls can't do science. That kind of inferiority complex that comes along.
That doesn't happen in my house.
What's that?
So that is not said in my house.
Exactly. You're all girl scientists, right? Of course you embrace the idea that that's stupid, okay? And you should, because it is stupid, okay? But that's the industry versus inferiority. The girls who say, I'm a girl so I'm never any good at math, are stuck in inferiority. That they're stuck there because when they tried in 5th grade to put their hand up and answer the math questions, they weren't called on. And so they were taught that that was a negative thing, and so they got stuck with this inferiority complex. At least that's what Erikson would say. And then there's identity versus role confusion. These are those terrible teenage years where kids are, what are teenagers like? Constantly exploring who I am. What do I think? What do I want to do? Who am I? What makes me me, right? Yeah, frustrating when you're not 18. When you're over 18, looking down on the teenagers, it's terribly frustrating.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
But
gonna
I-
strangle my sister most days. I'm just like, can you just please stop being 13 or 14, however old
She can't. She gets the same option to be 13 the same way you did.
She probably
Okay.
wants to stop being 13.
What's that?
Right? So she probably wants to stop for a minute.
Yeah, and I get frustrated because I have 8 children, and I'm watching them all go through these phases, and I'm sick of it. I've had enough. I am so tired of 15-year-olds. I want to
You're not gonna
vomit.
have a 9?
Yeah, and then I'm gonna have more, right? We're not gonna have number 9, but I'm so sick of it, and I want my 15-year-old is just getting out of that phase where he's starting to understand that when he was 14 and 15, he was a real moron, and he was doing it just because. He's kind of getting out of that phase, and he's starting to recognize that mom and dad are right, and he's starting to say the things that mom and dad said, and I'm telling the 12-year-old, Watch, this will be you soon. You could skip from 13 to 16 if you really wanted to,
Please.
but I recognize you're not going to, okay? And the same thing with the 10 and the 8-year-old, I keep telling them, you don't have to be that way. But they're too busy being 10 and 8 to look down the road and see what the right thing to do is, because they're not cognitively able to do it. As a parent, it's very frustrating, because I know the right answer, and I can't give it to them. I have to let them figure it out on their own. It drives me crazy, and I'm just sick of it. 4 children, 4 teenagers is enough. Nobody should have to raise 8 teenagers. It's awful.
Well,
But I did it to myself, right? So every time I get frustrated, I'm like, well, we wanted another baby. My wife gets mad, and I'm like, I was done with 3. Okay, they'd have been out the house next year. No, you had to have another girl, so 5 more. So I don't, I'm like, I can put up with it. But this is when children start to think about what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be a paleontologist, I want to be a marine biologist, I want to be a nurse, I want to be a rocket scientist, whatever. This is where they're trying to develop their identity. And they can get stuck in real world confusion. Now, a lot of people today, I think that Erikson is going to be challenged a lot on this role confusion, because what's our general understanding of people becoming who they want to be? We're like, whatever, if you want to be a world famous Olympic athlete and turn yourself into a woman, who cares, right? And so we're not recognizing role confusion for what it is anymore. And we're struggling with that an awful lot. We got people who want to be wolves. What the hell is that all about? I don't get it. I call that mental illness. If I said I wanted to be the Queen of England and I insisted you all bow to me because I'm the Queen of England, they'd lock me up, right? But if I'm an athlete and I want to be a woman, whatever. So I'm thinking that this role confusion over the next couple of years is really going to be challenged. People are going to either go, look, Erikson had it right, or no, Erikson's totally wrong, and we're going to have to rethink the way we think about identity and role confusion. That maybe it's not confusion at all.
She might
I don't
still
know.
be in that role.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, and then your book stops there, but I thought Erikson was so important, I wanted to do a little bit more to take it all the way into adults. Since you guys don't get a lot of developmental psychology, this is important in dealing with older people as well, okay? And then, so from 18 to 35, we have love, intimacy, and isolation, okay? And it's such common sense, right? Between 18 and 35, everybody's looking for love. Okay? Everyone wants love between 18 and 35. And those who can't find love with, a partner, find love with a dog or a cat or children of their own, so to speak, my furry children. While it gets frustrating, I understand, just like I did with my teenagers, that's part of being 18 to 35. I get it. Okay? It's a time where people focus on love and marriage and family and dating. And they get success by forming loving relationships, and they get failure with, they end up alone, and they never quite form that loving relationship. And those who are alone and isolated, rather than putting up with it, they find love with non-human things like dogs and cats. Okay? Which is where we get the crazy cat lady. Okay, the one with 35 cats and no husband, right?
See you in 10 years, guys.
And so that, Erikson would say it's because they weren't able to achieve the crisis of finding a lifetime partner to fall in love with and to marry, okay? And everyone likes to think of that as like, love and intimacy is a girl problem. It's not. Men have the exact same things, and we do it differently. And men who don't find mates, they have dogs. Sleepless in Seattle is a great example. Tom Hanks, his wife dies, and he's all alone. He's raising his little 8-year-old kid, and he's got this dog. It's an amazing dog, right? Or is that Sleepless in Seattle? No, that was that one about books.
that was, You Got Mail.
You've Got Mail. That was You've Got Mail.
Yeah.
Where he's got that great dog, Brinkley, that goes everywhere. Because he can't be alone. He's in this phase. He's in the love versus isolation. He can't be alone. He's got to find someone to love. So he loves Brinkley the dog, right? Men do the same thing.
And his father was the same.
Exactly. Only his father found what were they, nannies instead of dogs. He was-
what? Nannies?
Nannies.
Have
He
you
was
ever
on
seen
wife
it?
like number 6. We're getting divorced, and she was my nanny. Isn't that ironic? They were all his nanny. Like all of his ex-wives were his nanny. But that's the thing. So then there's generativity versus stagnation. And this is me right now. Driving me crazy. I'm in generativity versus stagnation, and I see it.
At
I'm-
first, I thought you said you were in wisdom versus.
I know.
No, I'm
I
just,
was like,
I'm
you are not greater than 65.
way up here. I just can't reach it. But you know, it's that middle age time, that midlife crisis thing, where you come to a point in your life and you say, I want to do more, and I need to do more, that kind of thing. And so, you know, I'm retired from the Army and I have all these big dreams, and because I'm an INTP, I have these like crazy fantasy ideas all the time. You guys know about Myers-Briggs? Right?
Yeah.
So I'm an INTP, that's me. Sometimes I'm an INTJ, but
Okay, I don't
one
know
of it
that
means
means.
that, or I'm an ENTP, I'm sorry, I'm an extrovert,
Yeah.
you know, and I like to be outgoing, and things have to be quick and fast, and then I lose interest in them 6 months later. So I have to get it done right away, or else it'll never happen. And so, you know, my current fantasy is, well, what if I opened a birth center here in Fayetteville? Could I open a freestanding birth center here in Fayetteville and fix all the evils of the world? Wouldn't that be great? And so, you know, that's the generativity in me. That's I want to publish my theories, and I want to write books, and I want to take it beyond, you know, the love and intimacy that I found with my family. Now I want to focus on my career and really let my career take off.
So you said this is to like midlife crisis stage?
Midlife crisis stage,
How
yeah.
come it's
Late
typically
30s, early 50s.
the, like, men who get, like, judged for this? You know, like, oh, he got that
Yeah.
sports car or whatever. Like, it's normally the men who get judged for their midlife crisis. Like, why? Do you know why?
Women do too, they just get judged differently. Like Martha Stewart. When women act like Martha Stewart, they're doing the exact same thing, okay? They're just becoming the master of their environment. Their chosen career to be a stay-at-home mom, and they go crazy on Pinterest, right? And we just judge them differently, that's all. But men, you know,
Because my dad's had about 4 midlife crises.
Yeah.
So, just wondering when my mom's time is coming. So.
oh, I'm sure it's coming. And you may actually be there and you just don't recognize it yet.
For what?
You know, we're talking the midlife crisis.
Midlife crisis.
She's talking about why are men's midlife crisis? Why do men get judged so harshly for the midlife crisis and not women? And I was saying we do. It's called Martha Stewart. You know that Martha Stewart thing. That's a generativity crisis that they're meeting. That's the Pinterest going crazy crafts and all that stuff. You know, that's the PTA mom who's just obsessive, or the soccer mom who's going crazy while her kid's in high school and she's, you know, going nuts. That's the same thing. Okay, focusing on what is their realm of expertise, their realm of control, so to speak. You know, I see it all the time with these high school kids, and their band moms are crazy.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, oh, you're nuts! No, I'm not going to Memphis with you. You know? My daughter just got back from nationals, where her band took 3rd place in high stepping nationals. They got home at 4 in the morning. I was like, you guys are nuts. Yeah, they got
My
home.
little sister's friend.
Yeah, in Memphis?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where they were.
Did Pine Forest beat your school?
Pine Forest won. Pine Forest took 3rd, and the 2 bands that they beat I've never heard of, so it's nowhere around here. But anyway, so that's generativity versus stagnation. And the people who can't make it into generativity, the folks who can't achieve their dreams, so to speak, they end up with that midlife crisis that we talked about. They end up, you know, stuck in the doldrums, you know, where the world is gray, and they work in a cubicle and they're just miserable, right? Because they're stagnant. They can't move on. Okay? They feel useless. And then there's wisdom versus despair. And nobody is really working on geriatric development very much. There isn't a lot written out there on it. But wisdom versus despair, this was Erikson right around the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century. And he talks about, you know, this is where we face the end of our lives, where we start to think about retirement, and we start to look back on our lives and say, did we accomplish what we wanted to accomplish? Have we achieved everything we wanted to achieve? Are we happy with where we ended up, with the life choices that we made? We start to review our victories versus our defeats. What have I accomplished? When did I win and when did I lose? And was it worth it, kind of thing, okay? I think that nowadays, because we're living so long, we could probably push that 65 back, okay? Of course, Erikson, when he was talking in 1920, when he was talking about 65-year-olds, he was talking about people who today we would consider close to 80 or 90, right? The people who are really about to die, you know? This wisdom versus despair is that last phase. And I just think it's interesting to kind of understand it when you're talking about the folks around you and you're talking about your patients, to go, well, yeah, that makes sense that she would want to do that, or that makes sense that he would want to do that. That's about the right age. That makes sense, right? Okay. And now we'll go into attachment theories. And attachment theories talks an awful lot about infant development and very young children, okay? There are two primary researchers, Bowlby and, I'm blanking on the next one.
Mary Ainsworth?
Thank you, Ainsworth, Bowlby and Ainsworth. And they were partners. Bowlby was the lead researcher and Ainsworth was his student. Bowlby is a very, am I getting this right? I know those two were together. No, I'm thinking of Kohlberg and Gilligan, never mind. But Bowlby and Ainsworth were partners, but they were a little bit different. So Bowlby identified 3 types of attachment, or 3 phases of attachment that infants go through. And if you've ever dropped your 4-year-old off at the daycare center, you've seen these 3 phases of attachment, okay? There's protest, mommy, 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 versus mourning, while the kid pouts in the corner the whole time mom is gone. And when mom comes back, he goes back and he wants to, and he welcomes mom. But they start to develop this protective measure if they continue to be left behind. And so you see this in kindergarten, okay, all the time. The first week or so of kindergarten is rough, right? Parents and kids are crying, dropping their kids off, and then come a month or so into it, the kid starts to go, well, I don't need to worry about it, I can start to move on my own, okay? And they develop these protective measures to prevent that pain and the pain of protest that came along when they first got dropped off. And this is not negative or positive, this is just development. Okay, this just happens. This is what happens when you initially separate. Now, in the military, of course, moms in the military, they go back to work right away, 6 weeks. And so this phase gets totally skipped over because the kid spends their entire life, being dropped off at the daycare center early on. And before they even recognize separation, it's already there. So they didn't have to put up with that. But this is more of a nuclear family type theory. This wasn't written in 2010. This was written in like 1948, okay, where there wasn't a lot of separation between mom and baby. And then we'll talk about Mary Ainsworth, and we'll finish our attachment theorists, and then we'll move on after that. So we'll take a little break. And this is Mary Ainsworth, a student of Bowlby, and she talked about the different types of children and how they respond, okay? Where Bowlby was talking about the phases of wanting my mommy back, Ainsworth talked about the different types of children and how the different types of responses that they had. There was the secure child, and the secure child would cry when mom dropped them off, but they were able to solve their problems and were happy when mom came back. Yay, I love you, mommy, I trust you, and life is good, right? That's that's a pretty decent way of responding. And then there's the avoidant child who doesn't cry and then avoids mom when they come back. Like, no, I'm mad at you. I'm going to push you away. I'm not gonna love you right now. And then there's the ambivalent child, which is somewhere in the middle, where they're anxious when they don't want to get ready and they're struggling with the getting ready. I don't want to go to daycare. I don't want to go to daycare. And they drop them off in daycare and they cry and they fuss. And then they're upset the whole time. And when they come back, they're mad at mom and they're pushing her away. So that kid's like the worst of all of them, right? I mean, there's one kid who's like, yeah, I got this. The other kid's like, no, I'm angry at you. And then there's the ambivalent kid who's kind of in the middle, who's just unhappy all the time. Okay? And what she did her work first overseas in some primitive cultures in Africa, I believe. And then she came back and did her work again in Baltimore and found that they were very, very different, that children outside the United States act very differently than children inside the United States. And that the culture had more to do with it than just the humanity of it. Like all these other theorists, it's kind of like there's a human way of thinking and a human way of developing. But with this one, she found it was very, very culturally specific. All right, let's take a break before we get into our learning theories. It's 2 o'clock.
What was the differences? Like, was one more warmer than the other, or was it just?
Both doesn't say.
Yes.
And I don't care enough about it to look into it.
I agree.
The slide before the one that you stopped. Before that, right? Thank you.
No, that's not it.
Oh, no, that's not it.
That one.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You said that I could view comments of my paper on person, but I can't see that.
Oh, damn, it's okay.
I can. I printed your paper and it showed me the comments.
It comes up as a PDF because it's. Oh, what's up with this?
Have you started reading our papers?
No.
Oh. So you say, are they awesome? Do you love them?
I will say that the ones that I've looked at so far have been much, much better than they were last year, and that's good.
Well, that's good. That's on the side. Is that from, that's from home? Oh, okay. I think she wants to see the actual, the 18. I think what they did was, you can print out the PDF and then turn it into her.
Yeah, one great
See the
example.
download PDF? I shouldn't even know that. That's, yeah, see copy. As long as it shows like the person that you know that. Mhm.
That's not bad.
Well, 8. It's right. Yeah, okay.
How do you know?
And then once that goes back in the file, save as, and then send it to myself and print it away.
So the private stay like what on that?
Okay. Should it say right?
Yes, that's it. That's it. Okay. As long as you have your stuff and it should be where.
Okay, so then I can save it and then go print it?
Yeah.
Okay, so
It should be good.
perfect, thank you. So, more tools, save page, no, I don't do page.
And then come on and say thank you for the offer when you feel, I get so. I just double check my BBA.
I'm gonna do that, internship thing. Okay, so my 18,000, Rob, 5 days a week, it was 40 hours a week. Alright, let me send this to myself.
Yeah, that's not how it looks when I look at it.
I don't know, maybe there's like a button where you just sort of like, let me do like.
We got a lot.
That might not. I don't know.
Yep. Oh, the text ring?
About the thing.
Oh, yes, nurses says, hey, yeah.
Because I was reading the thing after you, sent it, and I was like, it said,
Exactly. No party, yes.
yep. All right, let me see.
I think
That's what it is. It's like missing that muscle tone right there.
I'm feeling some kind of way.
Yeah, cause it's like whenever I go out somewhere and they're like, oh, are you a military? I'm like, I'm dependent, and I just feel like, you say you're abandoned. That's what you want.
I feel you. It's like, I hate that shit. They're like, no.
Yeah.
You don't get camel for
Right? Get all in my feelings, I'm like, if I have a body, I'm like, slide it under the table.
Well, I know you guys have more to do now.
All right, thank you.
Just don't grade other people's papers
All right,
while you're there,
No,
okay?
the petting ceremony, he wants to see my ring.
Oh, how
I
nice.
don't know if Dr. Jones will let him know.
Yeah, I thought our families are petting us.
No, go into Pediatric.
The only stuff, yeah.
Your family puts you at graduation,
Yeah.
but go and pin you.
Katira.
So.
But he wouldn't be a part of it. He's gonna be like,
Yeah, right.
bring it, baby, run! I already told him. I was dying. No, I already got marks from him. That was like when I, cause I was in second ID, I didn't appreciate it. Right? I'm like, I don't want any favors, go ahead. Do you worse, cause I will do mine.
Those are always funny, like watching
Right?
husband and wife, and they're like, I'll take it that
It's just like personality stuff too. It shows just like you would really believe that.
Oh, God.
She was like, "Well, yeah, who wrote the book? Who got you?"
You just don't know.
Yeah. He was like, all right, boom. I'm like, did you hit me? He was like, what? I was like, did you hit it? Maybe you should do it again. So I was just like, I was like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking you're like 4 and 1, and I'm not gonna say a word.
I'm gonna go pick that up over there when I get.
Oh, that's what I wanted to ask her. Oh, sorry.
In my feelings. What's up, brother?
Yes, oh my God.
Oh,
That's-
sure.
Thank you so much. I was like hoping I had a receipt cup or something.
Guess I'm just going to eat my yogurt.
Oh, guess what's on?
You're bringing up on your maps. Oh, I know. So what you're gonna do is intergeneric.
Oh, wait, I just did myself wrong. Oh, these are commonly used, okay.
That's right. Yes. I'm gonna see if I can switch it since I wrote from the other one. What did he?
Hey, sorry I never got a chance to read your paper. I was at the ball Friday. Are you sure?
It was late and we opened it the morning of Friday, yeah. I'm like, there's no way, but because I said I will send it to you, I don't want to sound like I said something. Who should I give this to?
Oh, you can read.
Oh, okay, that's a copy then. Is it-
Yeah, keep.
Is that okay? I have 4 hours there and an hour. The requirement's at least 5, right?
You're fine. I'll just go ahead and put your name, oh, just put your name and your email.
Wait.
Right now.
Do you want me to post this?
Yeah, that's why I sent it to you. You said you were
And
gonna
I forgot.
post it. I tagged some people on the ones already, just to go ahead and get it.
I rolled out.
Yum. This one is strawberry.
Strawberry. The more you watch it, the funnier it
You
is.
picked it out?
Yeah, pull it through.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll go ahead and do your
Miss
second.
Elisa, is there any way you can send me the one that I know I'm over, I'm gonna go tonight.
You're going tonight?
Oh, maybe not, depending on if you guys send me.
What is, hold on, let me look and see who tonight is. I don't know if tonight is a new one or a repeat. If it's new, I can't send it to you.
I think it's.
I don't have to wait today to send it to you.
How about that?
John Leguizamo.
Jesse or John?
I think I got paid. Evan,
Oh, we got paid?
I think so.
Let's see, I'll tell you if we got paid. I'll be able to tell you.
Yeah. Okay, what was I looking at? Speaker broadcastings. Speaker broadcast. Yeah, tonight is a new guy, so I can't send it to you because it's new.
Is it John something?
Yeah, John, yeah, we got paid.
Leguizamo?
You didn't see Jesse Eisenberg?
No, I don't
Okay.
wanna send, I don't wanna see him.
What are you
Okay,
talking
yeah, I can
about?
send you Jesse.
For the Leadership Society.
Oh,
Oh.
Jesse Eisenberg is,
Yeah, how about
that
that?
dude.
Yeah, that dude, that's why I wanna see, cause I know his face.
Okay, does anybody else in here need one before, like,
What,
the Jesse Eisenberg one?
please?
Hey guys, I don't remember, did Ms. Grimes send an email regarding
The,
the recruiters? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
she
I
did.
see it, yeah.
What's the verdict?
What do you guys regarding?
Did you get paid?
Oh yeah, I got paid, I said I got paid.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Just got paid for having that.
Okay, who else?
New cover photo. New updated cover photo.
Hooray.
Not with everybody in it, but new and updated.
Oh.
It's a cover photo. It kind of felt weird having the old one up there anyway, so. So I was like, I'm moving it. I should have really stood sideways. Really wide.
Well, even if this building is open back there, won't be.
They pulled. Oh. Jim and the Holograms, they pulled the movie from the theaters
Wow.
because it's not making money.
Oh, damn.
And Donald Trump wants to boycott Starbucks.
Oh, Jesus.
Because of, don't
Wait.
because of that Christmas cup shit.
So what's going on with the?
They're bitching, excuse me, they're complaining that, the cup is red.
Yeah, because the cup is red and it doesn't have
For
any
Christmas?
Christmas. It doesn't have snowflakes or anything on it. Yeah,
I
like
was seeing stuff all in my feed. I'm like, what's going
And I
on
was
with
like,
Starbucks?
what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Nothing.
right. It doesn't. I
So
mean,
that's what that
it's-
big thing is.
it's red. It's a red freaking cup. I mean, that's all there is to it.
Because I saw, I guess they were like started buying Starbucks and writing Merry Christmas. I'm like, you're still giving your money to Starbucks, so it doesn't even matter.
Right.
Like you're
You're not
trying to
doing
make a point,
anything.
but they're still making money. So
You're not doing anything. I just find it hilarious. Watch.
dang, that's crazy.
Starbucks. Holiday cup. Okay. Maybe we should boycott Starbucks is the first thing that comes up.
Wow.
Because this is what the cup looks like, right there, just plain red,
People are so stupid if that's all they had to worry about. Like,
right?
Wow.
You know what, Toby Keith
Wow.
sang a song about this,
About?
red solo. Though I think he was talking about a different red solo cup, but still.
Crazy.
Even the, somebody posted, look, here's their Christmas blend with nothing Christmas on it, it's just red. Boycott that too.
Oh gosh.
Like seriously,
okay.
it's a
Rowena, I just approved your last one
freaking,
that you submitted yesterday.
Oh, thank you.
red solo.
Do you have one of these? What have you volunteered for this semester? No, just if you did it extra.
Love working.
Fall in, thank you.
That's right. Colin?
Just
You're already hungry.
What did I do?
I tell you, I do miss being private. It was so much fun.
Oh, tell me about it.
Ah,
Being a private,
yeah,
I skipped that step.
yeah, oh, you missed out.
Well, like since like no responsibilities and you can do whatever you want, not
Well, I like doing the stupid, like when you call them to attention and you had to sign off with your company motto. I love that stuff. And in medics, there was a lot of dancing, and there was a part we'd go, hurt me, hurt me. And you go, "Oh, I do love me a little bit." It was just hilarious. You know, you can't do that anymore, you can't talk
Yeah,
about
they
that kind of
changed
stuff.
it.
Oh, she get a card now, right?
Yeah, it just
Stress
doesn't work.
card.
So what rank is this that?
E3 and below.
E3, okay, I just skipped directly to
Go down, give me 20.
Let me see you something.
Sorry.
That's
Yeah.
Food
We didn't
costs
do
money,
any of that
food costs
either.
money, that'd be so crazy. All right, now we have to get back to work, here we go, recording again. All right, so we were talking about learning theories. So there are two basic types of learning theory. There's the behavioral or passive learner and the active learner. Clearly your book doesn't have much thought, doesn't put a lot of stock in the behavioral passive learner, because they just mention that they exist and then move on to the active learning theories. And I don't blame them, because I really like the active learning theories better myself. Bandura is the man. The first professional talk I ever gave, I used Bandura's learning theory in writing it and in showing how I was going to teach people. Albert Bandura is mid-60s learning theorist, and he came up with the phrase self-efficacy. Anyone ever heard of self-efficacy before?
Yeah.
Yeah? Self-efficacy is often confused with confidence, but it's not. Okay. Remember we were talking about the little girl who raises her hand in algebra class and doesn't get called on and is taught that girls can't do math? Okay. That's a girl who has lost her self-efficacy. Okay. Where the boys in that class who answer the question, the teacher says, "Yeah, Johnny, you got it right." Every time they perform positively and get a positive response, their self-efficacy level rises. And so repeated correct performance raises self-efficacy. It's a little different than confidence. Confidence comes whether you have prior performance or not. Okay, confidence is, I know I can do this even if I've never done it before. Okay, whereas self-efficacy is, I've done it before and so I know I can do it again. Okay, and that's really the difference between confidence and self-efficacy. They're very, very similar, but the difference is confidence can't be taught in a classroom. Self-efficacy can, and that's where it's important. Where you give little challenges and then reward for little challenges, and then they go bigger challenges and bigger challenges and bigger challenges. And that's how you develop self-efficacy. But Bandura taught that learning happens through observation and modeling. Okay, and then there's Lev whatever, Levsky. Okay, we'll just call him Levsky. So good old Levsky, he won't mind, he's dead. So good old Levsky talked about the effect that culture has on development, specifically on learning. And just yesterday, my brother-in-law, who he's about my age, but he's a very active guy. He's a black belt in Taekwondo, and he loves to compete and run triathlons and all this crazy stuff. He showed a picture. There's an article yesterday on the training techniques of the Chinese athletes, and there was it was definitely a hit piece on the Chinese athletic program, and they were talking about like there was a little girl, she looked like she was like 5, and she's sitting there with her knees out like that, and her trainer, an adult, is standing on her legs and like right on her knees, and she's holding him and she's screaming in pain, and they were saying that they were pretty brutal in how they train these young Chinese athletes. But, are they not amazing athletes? They get results, right? And so that's the cultural impact, that they expect that kind of thing in that culture. And if you go to this institute, you know it's going to happen, And I think about it, it wasn't all that bad. It wasn't all that different from my coach, who used to smoke the bejeebers out of me, 5 days a week, he used to beat me bad. And God forbid I misbehaved, he beat me even worse. And to the point where when I had the basic training, I was like, you got nothing. 20 push-ups, you want them on one finger?
Yeah.
My coach made me do 1,000 push-ups. I mean, it was no big deal to knock out huge numbers of push-ups. So, but that was, so I don't really fault the Chinese athlete program. That's culturally what they expect. Anytime you've got a program that really excels, people are going to attack them, like they did the Russians during the 70s, right? Or during the 80s. But he coined the phrase zone of proximal development. Any idea what the zone of proximal development means? No?
No.
So the zone of proximal development, I always have to look this up too. It means that one learns much more successfully when assisted by another person. In other words, a child left alone to her own devices would accomplish fewer developmental tasks and not nearly the degree that would be achieved if the child has received the assistance of another person. So, what does that sound like?
Nurture.
No. What do you guys see with your, how do you guys
Teacher,
practice
student.
your zone of proximal development?
When we're discussing topics, asking each other
Study
questions.
groups, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, coming together with other people and learning off of other people. That's the zone of proximal development. And what it suggests is that you want the classroom to be interactive. You want people looking at each other and pinging ideas off each other instead of one person speaking and everyone else just soaking it in. Okay? That's the passive learner that the book was saying is not such a great idea. You want to be an active learner. You want to kind of move around and take part in the conversation. Okay? And then Yuri Bromfenner talked about the social environment having an effect on development, and that goes along with what we've already talked about, with the environment that you raise a child in is going to impact how they learn. Duh, right? Some of these things, you know, when you say them out loud, you're like, really? There's a theory for that? Is there a theory for tying your shoes? Well, you know, once upon a time, people didn't understand this. Somebody had to come together and put these common sense ideas into theory. Because before they said that, it didn't make any sense. You know, like the way I look at breastfeeding makes perfect sense to me. But when I read textbooks and I talk to other people, they go, what the heck are you talking about? And it's because I haven't put my theory on paper yet. That's why I got to write it down, and then it'll start to make sense. And someday they'll go, I remember before we used to do it that way, and then Johnston's theory revolutionized, whatever. That's that generativity versus stagnation jumping out of me again, right? And then we're going to talk about Piaget, the cognitive theories. Piaget, very, very famous. Anyone know how Piaget came up with his theories? From looking at his own 3 children. Piaget looked at his kids and went, they're average. This is what normal children do. Got it. But he was a very good observer of child behavior. And so even though he was only looking at his own 3 children, he was able to identify and generalize what his children did to the rest of the world. And they kind of matched pretty darn well. He was pretty good at it. A good guess, or he paid a lot of attention. So he breaks it down into several developmental stages, the first being the sensory motor stage, which is birth to the age of 2. And they say that cognition comes entirely from senses. So everything they learn is from what they can see, hear, and smell, right? They're not really like spending a lot of time thinking about the mysteries of the universe. They're not trying to come up with abstract thought or solve algebraic equations. They're saying, that smells good, that tastes good, that feels good, okay? And that makes good sense for a toddler. Yeah, I got it. Then there's 2 to 7, development through motor skills. And it goes very well with the little kids who I want to do it all myself, okay? Everything is I want to practice doing it. Everything is, they're picking things up, they're moving, they're stacking cups, they're pouring water from one thing to another, they're playing in sand tables, they're running, they're hitting the ball, bouncing the ball, learning their world through their motor skill, through experiencing their world and how they can move and interact things in their world, okay? And then there's concrete operational, where they start to organize the world in a logical through using logic, and they start to this is 7 to 11. What are kids from 7 to 11 doing? Right? We're talking 2nd grade to 5th grade or something like that, and they're learning how to read and to write and spelling and the rules of mathematics, and they're getting concrete things down, things that they can see, hear, and touch, and things that they can manipulate. All right? They're not able to work algebraic equations. They're not able to think about, abstract thought yet. They're working still on the concrete phase. And then we get into formal operations, into our adolescent years and into our teenage years. That's where we start to come up with the abstract thought, which is why this is also, it lines up well with Erikson when he talks about identity. Right? Because they're starting to explore outside what they can see. They're starting to look at different options, and they're starting to come up with abstract ideas. Now, how would you apply that in pediatrics? What would, like when I think about if you're, think of a way that you would apply that as a pediatric nurse taking care of an 8-year-old. Would it be different than taking care of a 12-year-old?
It should be, yes.
It should be. And why is it different? Or how can you think of an example of how you would do it differently for an 8-year-old than you would for a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old?
The types of questions you'll ask.
What's that?
The types of questions you're
The
gonna
types of
ask.
questions you'll ask, maybe the types of explanations you would give to a kid, okay? It's very easy when you're working with an 8-year-old to say that I'm giving you this medicine because what I'm gonna do next is gonna hurt and it's gonna make you feel better. Okay, this medicine makes you feel better, got it, okay? Where with a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old, you can start to teach them the idea that I know this is going to hurt, but I need you to do it anyway, okay? Like physical therapy or, chemotherapy, whatever. You can start to rationalize and get them to understand there's a benefit down the road if I do this, okay? Very different. You can't get an 8-year-old to recognize the benefit down the road, okay? It's hard to get an 8-year-old to say, if I do an extra 20 push-ups every day, I'm gonna be stronger 10 years from now. They don't really understand that all that much, but a 15-year-old can. And that's why as they get older, they hit from 12 to 18, they really can start to work on long-term planning and development. And if I work now, I'll get a benefit down the road. That's formal operational. And so it's important when you're working with kids to act appropriate for the age of child that you're in. And you're talking to a kid and it doesn't make any sense to talk about abstract thoughts that don't exist. My favorite example is when I'm working with perinatal bereavement. And I've had a family who's lost a baby, and you have to explain it to their children, or teach the parents how to explain it to their children, okay? The kid who's in concrete operational, 7 to 11, he can understand mom was pregnant, mom's not pregnant anymore, okay? He might have a little magical thinking, a little fantasy about angels in heaven, but that's about all he can understand, okay? Whereas the older child can understand not only that mom had a baby and now she doesn't have a baby anymore, but how that impacts mom and how that's going to change mom's behavior and how mom's going to be sad for a while because she lost a baby, she lost another little brother, that kind of thing. Where the 5-year-old doesn't really understand that mom was going to make me another little brother, right? All he understands is mom was pregnant, now she's not, and I don't even know what pregnant is, right? But the 17-year-old knows, or the 14-year-old knows, mom was pregnant, and now she's not pregnant, and she's sad, and I lost a brother, and that kind of thing. So you can see how the thoughts are much more complex as they get older. And when you're working with families, and they've got other children, and you're trying to explain it to them, you can explain to them, so I wouldn't explain to my 3-year-old the same way I would explain to my 12-year-old. So let me give you some tips on 3-year-olds. That 3-year-olds are in this developmental motor skills thing, and so they might learn best by drawing a picture of a baby or a picture of an angel or that kind of thing and express themselves that way because they're in the motor phase. Whereas an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old could just talk about it without physically doing it. You understand what I'm saying? Okay? And that's where these are, so try to think, how would I use this in my practice? Not just memorize what I say, okay? I forgot I made this slide because I didn't think the other slide gave enough information. But I've already talked about all of this stuff. Some important things is that in pre-operational, they go from motor skill to beginning to understand intuition. And then in concrete operational, they categorize and they label and they start to solve concrete problems, like 2 + 2 is 4 and 10 times 10 is 100, concrete things that they can see. And then formal operational is where they get abstract reasoning, logic, and the ability to see both sides of the argument. It's really fun to work with the older children and talk about now, okay, so we're going to do, there's a pro and con. I'm going to take the pro side, you're going to take the con side. But I'm in favor of it. I don't care. You have to pretend that you're not in favor of it. Go. Those kind of exercises help them develop this formal operational thinking. It's like when I was, my son made me write a paper for him the other day. Did I tell you guys that? Yeah. So my son, I gave him a paper on morality. I wanted him to write a paper on morality, and he wrote this half-assed little worthless, 3-paragraph thing. And I was like, oh, bless you. I was like, oh, no, that's not going to happen. And I was like, it's got to be better, it's got to be bolder, it's got to be bigger, it's got to, really explore the topic. And he was giving me trouble. I said, look, I'm kind of good at this. I do this kind of for a living, and, I write all the time. And, just last weekend I wrote 3 papers, and it was, yeah, but you write on something that you love. You're always writing about breastfeeding. It's so easy for you. And I said, well, no, I could do this for any topic. Give me a topic. And he said, okay, well, let's talk about Divergent, which is apparently some book.
Yep. Yes.
And I saw the movie, so
Fantastic.
I saw the movie. I've never read the book.
Way better.
What's that?
Books are way
The books are always better because you really can get into the fantasy.
Significantly better.
Yeah, and they give so much more detail. Anyway, so I said, well, I can't write you a book report because I've never read the book, but I'll write you a paper on Divergent if you want me to. And I sat there and I wrote 5 pages on Divergent. And I wrote it about teenage angst and how the story of Divergent is really the teenage girl seeking her own identity, trying to break out from society and to be different than the other people in society, even though it's against her parents' wishes and that kind of thing. You know, and do a couple of allusions to the idea that what's the book? What house does she go into? It's Discord or something like that. What's it called? The house that she goes into?
It starts with a D. It's Dairy. Dauntless.
Dauntless. Okay, Dauntless. And I talked about how, it's probably not an accident that the Dauntless house is the house associated with violence and rebelling from society. And that's why she went there, because it's violent to break from your family and not do what your family wants, expects you to do. And I wrote it all out and I said, here you go. And he was just like, I was like, good, now you do it. Because how did I get there? By practicing, constant practice. You will become good at whatever you practice the most. Right. And if you practice making excuses for why you can't do it, you'll become an expert at making excuses for why you can't do it. But you'll never get any better at doing it, okay? So you got to practice it over and over again. Anyway, so that's those little exercises that you can do when you're in the formal operation stage of a teenager. If I tried to do that with my 10-year-old, he would look at me like I was stupid, right? Because he was just like, I don't get it, right? Let me fill something out or build something for you, right? Much, much better. He's not very good at putting his ideas on paper. Okay. So then we're going to get into intelligence theories. And good old Howard Gardner, who I really wish he was around when I was a kid, but because it would have made my life so much easier. Because my teachers thought I was a moron until I was about 15, and then they just recognized me as lazy. But I think I told you that I've always been a horrible, horrible speller. It's why you will never, very rarely, will you ever see anything handwritten by me. Because if I don't have spell checker, I don't believe I wrote it right. I can't spell anything. Like I have to look up do not disturb. Like how do you spell disturb? I don't know, I gotta look it up. Yeah, I'm absolutely horrible at it. And so in 6th grade, I was in the gifted program and I failed another spelling test, like my 5th one in a row. And my teacher pulled me up to the front of the room. Tommy, come to the front of the room. I stood in front of the room. She said, Tommy, spell idiot. And I had no idea how to spell idiot. I was like, I-D-E-O. It's like, oh, thank you. You proved my point. Go sit down. So apparently my teacher didn't understand Howard Gardner and didn't understand that, you can be smart and not know how to spell, right? Yeah, try that today, right? People would come out with the pitchforks and the torches. But it was okay to insult people when I was little. What's that?
That says, like, if you judge a fish's ability to climb a tree, it'll grow up thinking it's stupid.
Yeah, that's Einstein.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Einstein, that if you judge a fish by his ability to climb a tree, the fish will always think he's a failure. But if you judge a fish by his ability to swim, he could be a success. That there are just things that people are not capable of doing. And it's like I can't spell and I can't remember numbers. My 5-year-old, by the way, is incredibly like her mother. I'm not going to say incredibly bright, but she's incredibly like her mother. That you ask my 5-year-old, Dorothy, how do you spell Ignatius? I-G-N-I, whatever, however you spell Ignatius, she can do it. Or, what's mommy's phone number? 910-964-7627. How do you do that? I asked my wife, honey, do you remember our phone number when we lived in Launchstool? Bing! 06-371-142573. Launchstool was 1993. And she remembers the phone number. I can't remember my phone number today. I got to look it up. Okay. So my wife is a linguistic auditory learner. Okay. Me, I'm more bodily kinetic, right? Or kinesthetic. I need to learn by movement. I need to learn by manipulating. I need to learn by moving things around and playing with it. Interpersonal learners like to learn by relating to other people. They're the people who do really well in study groups, who learn off of other people rather than just, looking at a book. Interpersonal learners who learn through self-reflection, thinking about, I wonder if I could have done this better, or I wonder if I could do this, if there's another way that I could do this. Logical and mathematical learners, people that just drive me crazy. The ones who can look at formulas and go, oh, well, that's a curve, and oh, that's a this, and, they do, what is it called, a linear regression? What is it called? What's that called? Spatial.
What is it called?
What's it?
Spatial reasoning?
Spatial reasoning? Anna does it too. Where you put a bunch of numbers up there and all of a sudden you cross them out.
Oh, the dimensional analysis?
There you go, dimensional analysis. And I look at that.
I knew you were gonna know
And
it.
I go, I watch people do that and I go, where'd you get that letter? I don't remember that in there anywhere. And it's like this, it magically appears. And to them it makes such perfect sense. Because they're logical, mathematical, they can see things that I can't see. My favorite example of this is playing chess or throwing or hitting a fastball. It's called pattern recognition. People who have a particular talent in a particular way of looking at things can see things happen long before it happens because they can see the pattern before it gets there. Like chess players, when they're playing chess, the really good ones are thinking 7 moves in advance. He's going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, it's going to make him do this, and they can force the future to happen if the people that they're playing against doesn't recognize their movements, right? And because they're logical, they can work it out, they can think in the future. Fastball hitters can see the way the guy is holding the ball and where his fingers are on the stitches when he throws the ball and can watch the ball spin through the air and see it spinning as it's coming at him at 100 miles an hour. He can see the stitches, and it enables him to hit the ball and predict where it's going to be. It's fascinating stuff because they're talented at being able to see and understand very quickly. Whereas other people like to make songs out of things. This musical works really well with young children, teaching them how to do things, right? Like the alphabet song, right? Everybody learned their alphabet by singing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. And you can't, right? You're like, which is the one that comes after N? L, M, N, O, O, right? Everybody does that because there's a bit of musical learning in everybody. How about this one? Who can tell me the preamble to the Constitution?
Only the people in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice.
Okay, how many of you in your head are singing the song?
Oh,
We the
Schoolhouse
people in
Rock.
order to
Yeah.
form a more perfect union. That one, right? I can't do it without singing the song. I don't know the words. Okay.
All words.
And then naturalistic, being able to explore the world around them. These are people who would do better like going out and walking amongst the trees. There's a lot of really good evidence out there that when you're studying, every couple of hours you should stop studying and go walk around the trees and then come back. Okay, just getting out with nature, getting the air, fresh air and trees around you kind of rejuvenates you and resets your brain and puts you back to work. And then the spatial learner, the visual learner, these are the ones who can parallel park really well. These are the ones who can hit the baseball really well, who can see things that aren't there. And they can like, oh yeah, that would fit in this space, that kind of thing.
Oh, no.
Yeah, like football kickers, exactly. They can see things that aren't there, and they can put things where they are. They're very visual, very, you know what I mean. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about moral development. Yeah, whatever, go on. So John Piaget, he did a piece on moral development, but they really explain it better with somebody else. He broke it down into 2 types of moral development. There's the less than 11 years old and the older than 11 years old. Okay? The kids that are less than 11 years old, they experience right and wrong as concrete. This is good, this is bad. Got it. And then children who are 11-year-old recognize that things aren't always absolute. Yeah, maybe I can fudge a little here to get something there. Very simplistic, yeah, whatever. I would spend my time with Piaget thinking about his formal operations, concrete operations, not so much about his moral development. Kohlberg does a better job with moral development, and his partner does it after him, Gilman, I think, does another very good job. So Kohlberg, he broke down moral development into 3 basic phases: pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional. The pre-conventional, and he doesn't really break it down by age. But you can see the various ages in this. You can see that the pre-conventional kind of lines up very well with Erikson's early, or with Piaget's less than 6-year-old kid, okay? But thinking is concrete, very egocentric. What does egocentric thinking mean? Right, thinking of myself, okay? Very internally focused, very self-focused, I, okay? But when we're talking about little kids, we're not there, they are kind of narcissistic, but narcissism has such a negative connotation to it. But it's a great story. This man is talking to a little girl that he had just met. She's about 4 years old, and she had just turned 4. And he was talking to her about her birthday. And so, talking to her about her birthday for a little while, and the little girl all of a sudden stops and goes, "Well, why weren't you at my birthday?" And he had to tell her, "Well, because I didn't know you 20 minutes ago. I didn't know you had a birthday yesterday." And it's very hard for her to understand that this man, who was her friend, she kind of liked him, wasn't her friend 2 days ago, okay? Because she's very egocentric. Her world is all about her perspective, and she can't take perspective from other people yet, okay?
We had gone to Stone Cold Creamery. And
Cold Stone Creamery.
That's what I say. I didn't say
Stone
that.
Cold Creamery.
Okay, sorry. So my 8-year-old was.
Stone Cold Steve Austin.
I know, right? Oh, yeah, that's what it was. But she was ordering her ice cream, and the guy was like, "Well, what flavor do you want?" She's like, "Well, my favorite."
Right. Exactly.
Like, how could you not know my favorite?
Exactly.
I looked at him, how could you not know her favorite?
And that's egocentric, because the world revolves around them, not because they're so special, but
Right.
because they haven't the capacity to think what other people are thinking. They can't put together by looking at you what's going on in your world. They're still trying to figure out what's going on in their world. Okay?
Me too.
Yeah, right? So everything is black and white, and it will eventually progress to understanding fairness and justice. Then there's conventional, where they incorporate social and interpersonal relationships. That sometimes it's okay to break the rules if it's doing it for the greater good. You know, my wife is kind of stuck in pre-conventional, like she follows every single rule. And me, I'm like, it's okay if we go across that line. When you go, it's fine. They don't really mean not to cross the line. There's a street over there to turn into. Clearly, I can cross that line, right? So I'm not in pre-conventional. I've kind of moved to another phase. Okay, so they recognize that sometimes there's a reason to break the rules. Sometimes breaking the rules is the right thing to do.
Yes.
And then there's post-conventional, where social contract and individual rights and universal principles, where they start to understand those things. These are, I like the 20-year-old liberal theme. Have you ever heard the Winston Churchill once said that if you're a liberal, or if you're not a liberal at the age of 20, you have no heart. And if you're not conservative by the age of 40, you have no brains. And that's a Winston Churchill thing. But he was talking about, what he was recognizing was this post-conventional need to explore social contracts and individual rights and universal principles. Trying to kind of get an understanding of the world before you concrete your ideas and what you are. Okay? There are other phases, but they go into adulthood, and they're not terribly important. Then there's Carol Gilligan. Now, Carol Gilligan was a student of Kohlberg, the same way Bowlby and Ainsworth were teacher and student. And she recognized, Kohlberg, that works great for boys. But girls don't think the same way that boys do. So she did his work again, but from a feminist perspective. And she found that while men like to think about autonomy and justice and rules, women aren't necessarily that way. And so from a feminist perspective, she recognized it as more where men think of autonomy and justice, women tend to think of caring and relationships. And so the first phase was orientation of the individual survival, which is where the little girl begins selfish and begins to develop responsibility toward other people as she begins to mature. Then there's goodness is self-sacrifice, meaning that if you're going to be a good girl, you sacrifice for other people. That's goodness is self-sacrifice. Okay? And so they look at the world through the needs of others instead of the needs of themselves. Okay? And then finally, the transition level from goodness to truth, where choice starts to become important and doing for herself becomes more important than doing for others. And they stop being good for goodness sake. Okay, and so they start to, just like Kohlberg's third phase, just like Kohlberg's the post-conventional phase, where they start to realize that there's a time to break the rules. Gilligan calls that a transition level, where you stop being good, you stop following the rules just because. Okay, but can you see can you see the difference in the male thinking versus the female thinking? They're kind of saying the same thing, but they say them a little bit different. Okay, one focuses on rules and autonomy. The other focuses on caring and relationships. You know, doing for others and caring for others. Now me, I'm a midwife. You know, someone called me a unicorn the other day. I definitely am more in the service arena than I am in the justice arena. You know, I think a lot about how what I'm doing helps other people, and so I'm trying to do good for other people more. So I'm probably stuck in the goodness is self-sacrifice phase. I haven't moved to doing what I want to do because I want to do it phase. Okay? But that's okay. It drives my wife crazy, but I say from time to time, I'm half the man you think I am. I really am. You know, I'm quite the feminist. But and it brings me.
Yes.
So Carol Gilligan would say this: well-behaved women seldom make history.
Amen.
Yep. And I love that phrase. Well-behaved women never make history. You got to break out of your shell and think about being, what's that?
A rebel. That's
Being a little bit of a rebel, but being an advocate for more than you know your mom and dad want you to be an advocate for, so to speak. Now, I don't think that people, you know, I'm not the much of a social justice warrior, but at the same time, I say that, you know, women have a very powerful role to play in the world. There's a very interesting perspective that we gain when we invite diverse opinions into our world. It's why obstetrics is so screwed up today. We took a woman-dominated area and tried to control it by men. And so it went from being something that talked about relationships and love and care and hormones to being something very mechanical. Planes, angles, make Pitocin, make them contract, make the baby come out. You know, so we took a very male-dominated perspective on birth for the last 50 years, and we've really screwed it up. And so now, with the resurgence of midwifery, the resurgence of nursing power, we're starting to see female perspectives in the arena, and we're starting to change the birth arena. Okay, I think that's very valuable stuff. One of my favorite military theorists is Ralph Peters. Ralph Peters, he's a current military theorist. But he talks a lot about the power of feminism in cultures outside the United States. And he talks about, you know, if half of your culture are women, and you ignore everything that they say, you have just lost half of your workforce, half of your great ideas, half of your intuition, half of your ingenious skills. You've lost it because you've ignored half of your population. That you have to bring everybody in order to get a better outcome. And that cultures who do embrace women's thoughts and women's needs and women's feelings do much better. The United States is better at it, say, than Saudi Arabia. And so, you know, we're going to do better as a culture because we're using our entire workforce, our entire brain power. We're not using just a little piece, you know, just that one little only men, you know, kind of piece that it kind of leads us down the wrong path. And so much of what we know in science is wrong because it was written by old white men 50, 60, 80 years ago, and they just totally screwed it up. And it became fact. It became, you know, just this is what has to happen. And it was wrong all along, okay? Like the idea that a baby's supposed to eat every 2 to 3 hours. What a stupid idea that is, okay? But that was somebody mechanistically trying to work out the mechanics of feeding, thinking like a man, and putting 8 to 12 into 24 hours and saying, ta-da, every 2 to 3 hours. That's literally where it came from. And it has no bearing on fact. And so, you know, this is my time to stop and go back to Gilligan and read about her thoughts. And think about what she says and see how you can apply that. That's the feministic morality model that I think really works pretty well. Gilligan, yeah, it's Carol Gilligan. Okay, but I warn you, and I was telling my clinical group this the other day. Half of the nurses out there in the hospital are morons. Okay, they're just absolute boneheads. And it's why doctors get so frustrated with them. Why midwives get so frustrated with them. You know, midwives are even worse than doctors at this. Because midwives, who is the midwife? They're nurses, right? Okay, but they're not normal labor and delivery nurses. They were the peak, they were the pinnacle of labor and delivery nurses who took the next step to go further, to become midwives, right? So they weren't the run-of-the-mill, lazy labor and delivery nurse that you see around. They were the ones who were the hard-charging performers. So they were already frustrated with their colleagues when they went to midwifery school. And they went to midwifery school, they got wicked smart. Now they look at the nurses like, whatever. Okay, they were the prima donnas who took it the next step. Okay, so we tend to look at nurses who don't know what they're talking about in a very negative light. And it does nursing a disservice when nurses don't know what they're talking about. So when, there was an interesting thing, we had a baby who was, what was that baby doing? The baby had oligohydramnios. And I was talking to, I don't remember who it was in the clinical group, but I was working through the process of oligohydramnios. So what is oligohydramnios? Low amniotic fluid. And what is the low amniotic fluid a marker of? Nope.
No. There's not enough room for the umbilical cord, so you can.
Okay, it can cause that,
But kidney function
No.
is not adequate.
kidney function, there you go. It's a marker because amniotic fluid is baby pee, okay? So the more they pee, the more amniotic fluid they have. So it's a marker of renal function. So we test to see how much amniotic fluid a baby has because we want to check his renal function. Now, how would you compare that to an adult?
Tracking urinary output for 24
Tracking urinary output, right? That every hour, this person who's in shock should pee at least 30 cc's an hour to show that their kidneys are working well, and that's a marker of hemodynamic stability, right? And so then I took it a step further, that if this baby has oligohydramnios, he may have kidney insufficiency. And why would he have kidney insufficiency? Because his placenta is not working very well, right? And so the hypoxic placenta that's not perfusing very well, is not perfusing the baby very well, is causing the kidneys to slow down and lose renal function, is causing oligohydramnios, okay? But as I was trying to explain this to the student, the nurse jumped in and said, it's because his placenta's not working very well. And I was like, okay, you get that piece, but you missed a giant chunk, okay? You know, why we were trying to do it. She didn't quite understand what I was trying to say. And so a lot of times, and then that same day we had a wonderful discussion about Pitocin. Who was there that day that we were talking, they had that patient who was going, he had 50-some units of Pitocin.
But I wasn't on the floor.
Okay, so we had this
that was
patient.
me.
Yeah, had this patient who had a huge dose of Pitocin. You know, normal Pitocin, most people will respond to about 13 units of Pitocin. And a lot of hospitals have these checkpoints along the way where you have to do different things in order to go over 20 or over 40. Cape Fear just has a maximum number. You cannot go more than 40 units of Pitocin, period. Which is kind of stupid. And it doesn't help you, it doesn't show any understanding of what Pitocin is. And it's like saying that there's a maximum dose of morphine. There isn't a maximum dose of morphine. You go up until you get the therapeutic effect and try not to make them stop breathing, right?
Yeah.
But everybody responds to it differently. And it's the same thing with Pitocin. Pitocin goes up until you get the therapeutic effect. And the smart provider will put some checkpoints in the way, like to say after 20 milliunits, you have to be on an internal uterine pressure catheter. After 40 milliunits, you have to reassess the baby's size and see why you're not making any changes, that kind of stuff. But the nurses were saying, no, we can't go over 40, that's policy. And the doctor was like, but 40 is not working. Why don't we take it the next step and try to get her into actual labor and try to move her towards so I don't have to cut her? No, we can't go over 40. So you're saying I have to cut her because she's going to sit here and not respond to 40 milliunits of PIT?
She did end up having a C-section.
Yeah, she did. And anybody who gets that high is probably not going to respond to PIT. But there were things that they could have done to make it different. But the nurses were stuck dogmatically. 40. They had no concept of why 40. They only knew 40 is the hospital policy. And that's the kind of thing that frustrates providers. If you want to make change, if you want to be in there and kind of run with the big dog, so to speak, and influence medical practice, you have to do it because you know what you're talking about. And where men and women struggle sometimes is women say, well, I think this, and I feel like this is the right thing to do. Well, I don't care what you feel. Okay, your feelings don't have any impact on me, and they certainly don't have any impact on that patient, so tell me why. And that's where nursing struggles, because we have a hard time putting our feelings into the why. And I do the same thing. I struggle with it too when I talk about midwifery. because it's hard to put emotions and hormones into a why and explain it. We just don't speak that way. Our language isn't there. So we have to develop it. And it starts with understanding physiology. Okay, off my soapbox. All right. Spiritual development. So James Fowler did a lot of work talking about, obviously, faith and spiritual development. And he talks about, just like with everything else, okay? So we've talked about psychological development. We've talked about emotional development. We've talked about moral development. Now we're going to talk about spiritual development. That there, he actually named stage 0 infancy, fundamentals of basic trust. It's hard to ask a 10-month-old what he thinks about God. Probably not going to be able to give much answer, right? And then stage 1, intuitive, projective, 2 to 6 or 7, where their beliefs are unquestioned. Why would a kid from 2 to 7 talk about this is, God is this, and nothing else? What does that sound like someone else we've talked about?
Oh.
Does that sound very concrete to you?
Oh, yeah.
Lack of abstract thought?
Oh,
These
yeah.
are the rules and that's all there is to it? Make sense? So it's the same thing. If you would ask, who was it that we were talking about with the formal operation? Not formal operations. Hold on. No. Dumber. Yeah, that one. Yeah. If you would ask Kohlberg to describe it, he would have done the same thing. And if you would ask Piaget to describe it, he'd have said the same thing, okay? That a kid who's under the age of 7 is probably going to struggle with abstract reasoning and to just struggle getting outside of concrete, right? So, the children in stage 1 are faiths or beliefs are unquestioned. Anything that isn't, belief is fantasy and magic, which is where Harry Potter becomes real popular. And then mythical versus literal, where they start to retell the stories and they try to reanalyze them, and they tend to think things very literally. That literally Moses wandered in the desert for 40 years. Moses did not wander in the desert for 40 years. He would have died of old age. Methuselah was 998 years old. He wasn't 900 years old. Okay, those are number tricks. But kids from the age of 6 to 12 tend to get stuck in the literality of it.
So that's a normal phase?
What's that?
Because my son is very literal, when his teacher would say something like, do you have ants in your pants? He would look at her not knowing what she's talking about, or if I say it's raining cats and dogs, he's like, Mom, what are you talking about? There's no cats and dogs, it's just rain.
Exactly. And so that's part of this. He takes everything very literally.
Yes.
It's also the very concrete way of thinking that you can't, to say it's raining cats and dogs means it's raining a lot is an abstract thought.
Right.
Okay, the literal thought is cats and dogs are falling from the sky. The abstract thought is, oh, it's raining a lot. Okay, and so a kid who's under the age of 12 struggles with the idea of abstract thought. And so all he can focus on what he literally understands, what's concrete, what's right there in front of him. There's a great book, I think it's Amelia Bedelia. You ever read the Amelia Bedelia series?
The original.
Yeah, Amelia Bedelia is very literal. She does everything exactly like she's told.
Didn't you want to try that pie?
There you go.
I wanted to try that pie so bad. I was like, it looks so good. Give me some of that pie.
Then we got stage 3, the synthetic invention, that begins as they enter the teenage years, and they begin to personalize their beliefs and look beyond family and values to include values that they would see in their relationships. So this is just like the teenager who's struggling for identity, right? He's trying to figure out what's going on in the world. I've got what I was raised with, now let me explore it a little bit and see what's out there. And try to make sense of it. And then finally, the individual reflexive, late adolescent, who takes responsibility for personal beliefs, invests personal energy into what makes sense, regardless of what others think, okay? Now, that is a very American way of looking at the world. Well, it just makes sense, okay? And well, this. I like to think of this as like the people who ask Dr. Google, where they got half of the information, but they don't have all the information, And from their ignorant perspective, they're going to make a judgment on this rather than asking the people who are experts in the topic.
They know more than you, yeah.
Right. But that's a very American way of thinking, right? Don't Americans think about that with just about every topic? Well, that's just the way I think, And And so, you know, me being Orthodox Christian, the Orthodox Christian were like the original Christian before the Roman Empire split, you know, or at the beginning of the split of the Roman Empire. And so when you ask an Orthodox Christian, how many Greek Orthodox does it take to change a light bulb? We go, change? What? Why would you want to do that? We don't change. And so if you go to my church, it looks exactly the same now as it did 1,000 years ago. That nothing changes. The robes that they wear, the facial, everything is the same as it was 1,000 years ago. And that's the same as it was in 300 AD when John Chrysostom wrote the liturgy, and the liturgy hasn't changed. And so we look at modern American Christians who will say, well, that just makes sense. We're like, okay, so you read one source. Well, what does William the Great think about this? Or what about Thomas Aquinas? What about all these other philosophers in religion? And what do they know? You know, and what are you missing? You know, because they take part of it but not all of it. And it's the same thing with like the immunization movement, you know, the anti-vaccine movement, or you know the even circumcision versus anti-circumcision. Most of the people who are talking about this really have no idea what they're talking about. They're reading things that they found on the internet, and they go, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, they're in this phase, and in my opinion, 3 is where you need to stop. If you can't understand it, don't go to the next phase and say, well, that just makes sense, because oftentimes you're going to think the wrong thing. You know. Anyway, but your book talks about how most people are stuck in phase 3, and they say it kind of as like a negative thing, that they're stuck in phase 3, that they can't take it to the next stage, and going to the next stage is like enlightenment. It's only enlightenment if you do the homework and you understand the philosophy behind it. I don't expect people to understand midwifery as well as I understand it, and I can't say that I understand theology as well as John Chrysostom did, right? So I know my limits. So now we'll talk about family development. Duval's theory is so common sense, it's boring, okay? When you read it, you're like, well, duh, isn't that what everybody does? Okay, so it breaks down the growth of a family from couple to grandparent, basically. And it's based entirely on the oldest child. The parents move through the phases at the age of the oldest child. But they can't progress through the phase until the youngest child makes it out of that phase. Okay? So, like me, with 8 children, I'm stuck in one phase for a very long time, getting all of my children through it before I can move on to the next phase. Okay? Where if you only have 1 or 2 children, it's easier. So, you know, it's the oldest child, so they get married and they establish themselves as a couple. Then they get married, they have a child. And when a child is born, they have to readjust from couple to family. Okay? I talk about that a lot. What we do in obstetrics is we teach couples how to become families. And so we're teaching them how to make that change.
That's a hard condition.
It's hard, yeah, exactly. Because everything is different. But then, no matter how many children they have, they've already become the family. Okay? And so they've made that change, and they're going to stay in that change until the oldest child goes to preschool. And then the oldest child goes to preschool. They have to learn how to function as the child leaves the home and starts to get into family and friends that you don't know. There's a great joke. Who is it? Louis C.K. You guys know Louis C.K.?
Oh, yeah.
He's kind of vulgar, but
comedian?
yeah, he's hilarious. But he tells a story about like being at a play date with his daughter's friend. And so, my daughter, she's got her friend, and they're having a great time, and I have to interact with her father, who, moron, I would never have anything to do with him in real life. We're only friends because our daughters like the same color, you know. and so that's what the family with preschool children has to do, is that they have to learn how to interact with other families that they wouldn't normally interact with because their children are friends. And so they come together. Cub Scouts is a great example of that. Okay, Cub Scouts, everybody comes together, there's 40 kids and 80 parents, and so you have to interact with the other parents even though you would not normally be friends with them, right? And so you have to learn to accept them into your family. Kind of, right. And then, because I'm a Cub master, I have to accept everybody.
Yeah, you do.
Family with school children. So they start to develop friendships with other families, and now they start to launch outside their family, like marching band. And my son is trying out for wrestling today, and that kind of stuff. And so it's making those adjustments.
What weight class?
Then the family, he's fat,
Oh.
so I would have to say heavyweight. My kid, William, is a fat boy. And he earned every pound of it too. Constant curls and crunches. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
That's what I was saying. Oh, no.
That's right. That's not an accident. So then the family with adolescence. The oldest child starts to turn toward launching and form independence, and the family has to adjust. Then the family launches to the young adult, the oldest child leaves home, and the family has to adjust to the idea of their children developing identities outside their own. Okay? But this is where you really start to see how they're stuck in this phase, because they're going to continue launching children until the youngest child is out of the house. Okay? And they're not going to move into the middle-aged family where they get to reinvest in themselves and be a couple without children until they've gotten their youngest child out of the house. Okay? And then they start to reinvest with them in their relationship, and then the aging family, the family starts to cope with the process of dying and retirement and loss and that kind of stuff. But all of it is really just kind of common sense that this guy put down on paper. And you're like, well, duh, right? It's just so much common sense, it's frustrating to have to talk about it.
That's the thing that's kind of hard to study for too, because it makes so much sense that you don't put,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's
Does that
tough.
sound bad? I don't want it to sound
It is.
bad, but it is.
And I'm going to write the tests hopefully before Friday. And Monday we'll have a study session like we did last time. We have to work it after. You think that's a great idea? Yeah.
Yes.
We just have to work it in between whatever classes Monday afternoon and lab that starts at like 3 o'clock or something, right?
Yeah. I mean, because honestly, when we were doing that study guide, like, we were thinking through the process, so it wasn't like we were just there.
No, I'm with you.
Okay.
I'm with
Well,
you.
we have informatics probably till like 2.
Yeah.
Do we?
Okay. 3 o'clock, time to break.
Yeah.
It's been another hour. We'll come back at 3:20 and then we'll go until 4:30.